Well, do we have a show this evening? The long-awaited From Russia with Love 9 completion will be unveiled this evening. It will be a long show. It will be very detailed, and it will be interactive. And it's been 2 years in the making. This show probably took me 120 hours to prepare and 4 hours to read it out. This is the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Enjoy the show.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Let's see who can handle the truth this evening. The long-awaited completion episode, the number 9 show, with 9 songs, and all the words equal up to 9 also. That has been held in abeyance since the last of the original series of 8C. And that was completed in November the 14th, 2019. We did, of course, do a rerun of 1 through 8C with additional information throughout 2020. And on August the 2nd, 2020, we launched into the From Russia with Love Plus series that has now reached 10 parts. And they are like supplements in some cases, deeper dives into what was covered into the original 1 through 8C episodes. Now, due to the popularity of this series, work is underway, more so in the new year, into producing it as a book. It will all be edited, revamped for the book form, and it is essentially going from a must-listen-to show into a must-read or perhaps listen-to event. And this show just may well be the most comprehensive and important show ever developed within the alt media. It's an impact show of the highest caliber and potentially a line in the sand show. We have opened the proverbial Pandora's box bit by bit this series, and this show snaps off the lid and the hinges off completely, and it will never be closed to the truth again. This series has pushed the boundaries of what we all thought we knew, what we thought was the truth, only to find, in many cases, the truth was thin on the ground. It has expanded the thinking and thought processes of the many who have listened to this series. It also brought up many contentious topics that caused many to initially be triggered, which is a sign in and of themselves that something is not right. Think of it as a soul spirit calling, reminding you of not all that you have believed is true. And now is the time for you to all relearn the truth in a cathartic and stimulating way. Triggers for one particular lady stood out during this series, as many of the religious people railed against me for the blasphemy of denying or denigrating their religion. In essence, I did neither. I presented an alternative theory initially and asked people some common sense questions. Those now familiar common sense questions brought on the triggers, and to one lady in particular. She was not pleased at me for what was in the early From Russia with Love shows, and having spent 40 years as a travelling pastor in the America's mid-states, she was not about to accept the information contained within the series. But my show only asked the questions. It was up to the individual to accept or not what was delivered. And after several fairly accusatory emails against me, and my response being, I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm not asking you to believe anything. Just hold the information lightly until you are really ready to receive it fully. And that's the key. And that lady, to her credit, returned some months later with an email, and suddenly there was a change in her. She said, after reviewing again all the information you delivered, processed it and no doubt healed some of it, because it is and can be painful receiving the truth. She said, I can no longer support what I'm doing as a pastor anymore, as the evidence against it is overwhelming once you see. And she walked away from her pastor role, and instead is now travelling to the same places to apologise to her followers and present the new information contained within the shows. And it's a massive kudos to that lady. It took some courage to do what she did, and all it took is the use of some critical thinking. Many others in our group have walked away from that control system also. All of them felt better and have gone on to developing themselves in the right way. No longer are they preying externally, because that is your energy being preyed upon, but they have gone internal and found that the real God was inside of them all along. Now, the purpose of this show is a wake-up call, and we've done many. Not only for the alternative media, not only for America, its government. This is a global wake-up call for humanity. The old world has stumbled and limped along for far too long now, and enough is enough. That even the general public are noticing something is clearly amiss with what we call life on this planet. We are not living. Billions are existing, and billions are even struggling just to exist. And this does not constitute real life and living. People in general do a good job of coping with it. But life should not and was never meant to be only about coping and existing. It is an abomination of what life and life force essence is all about. I have covered many topics and timelines in this series, highlighted many groups, questioned the value of religion, which can be a sensitive topic for many. But I have presented the evidence, and it's up to the individual whether to accept it or not. I have tackled the other sensitive subject that to some comes under the banner of anti-Semitism. Yet if you take your blinkers off, I am advocating heavily for the average Jewish person who has been used as a pawn in a sadistic game of confusion and illusion. And ultimately it's about presenting facts, many of which has been denied to us in a way that asks the listener to answer the questions and come to their own conclusions. Preconceived thought patterns deny many the truth, and his story has shown time and time again that their truth was distorted in so many facets and also written in blood. Now, tonight's show will have two facets to it, and while seemingly separate, there is enough dots already given in this series that links all things together. From Russia with Love 1 through 9 lays out all the details to understand the bigger picture and what has really gone on this planet. The From Russia with Love Plus series, now at 10 also, goes deeper into the things covered in the original series, although tonight's show, both parts, will be new and deeper in and of itself. No being ever has to be enslaved in fear, existing or struggling in life. There is an abundance to avoid that in this whole universe. Enough for everybody as deemed by Source, the Creator. And yet some people and beings choose greed, control, power, which are all low vibrational energy derivatives. And that is not only not good for those oppressed, it is just as bad on a soul level for the oppressors. And for many thousands of years now, this planet was run by an oppressive regime based on the sole intentions of harvesting the whole planet and causing destruction everywhere. Countries and people have been used as pawns in a never-ending trail of strife and woe, which turned people against each other. It was all designed that way. And society, no matter how high up you went or thought you were all still pawns in this game. And only recently are some just finding that out. Many, though, in the so-called higher echelons are still struggling to believe or understand they were fooled and lied to even more than the public was. Today we will show publicly in greater detail of the control system document that was never about restoration of the planet, but the destruction of it. A document of staggering complexity, planning and implementation. Very few have seen it. Only 2 people worked it all out. Of who, what and where everyone fits into this control system. Now I will unveil the whole document for people to gauge the size of it shortly, but we will be mainly focusing on the bottom 25%, as that is where most of the public impact is. It is also where even the most avid researcher will reside in terms of what people call the cabal, the Illuminati, bloodline families, Five Eyes or the deep state. All of them are in the bottom 25%. All of them. And that will rock most not familiar with THI shows, and I suspect many of you will wish to go higher than the bottom 25%. But you have to understand the lower portion before going anywhere near the top 75% as it was. It's not no more. Many of the names people are familiar with in the alternative media will come out as we unveil this show. There will be detailed portions, background information, proof documents all unveiled in this show, many of which will be first not only for the alt media but publicly also. Many of you will be staggered to find out that not only were you not aware of this structure, but neither were your politicians, military, agencies, heads of state or some of the bloodline families in a large part also. And this puts and shows compartmentalization in its fullest terms of how successive levels only knew their tiny piece of the puzzle each, and no one knew the full spectrum, not even close to it. Many of you will be staggered that very few of the so-called authorities that run our society, not for much longer, are also oblivious to this or what is going on in general. Governments are not governments, but harvesting corporations with no rights, constitutions or laws that serve the all. We have had no governments since 1871, only corporations. Mr. Biden himself is not the President of the United States of America. He is the CEO of USA Inc. The United States also has nothing to do with America either. United States is a European houses establishment group that was formed in the early 1800s in Vienna, Austria. Look up the Congress of Vienna, you will find out for yourselves. The US Constitution ended in 1871. Currently there is 4 floating around. None of them apply to we the people. America and 148 other countries have no national bank, only what is known as the Federal Reserve. And I say 148 countries, but it could be around 170 countries tied to this system, although in essence all 209 countries are in some way hooked into it. The Federal Reserve is not an American bank or company. It is or was owned by the Crown, which, contrary to popular opinion, is nothing to do with the Queen of England and more to do with the Temple and the Templar Bar of banking. Operating not out of London, but the City of London, which is not a part of the UK. Likewise, the District of Columbia, known as Washington, D.C., is also not a part of America. Now, Trump spoke of returning DC back to the people and the country, once certain rogue elements get over the fact that they have lost, and quit continuing to run a failed system. Except Trump was thinking the people is the black sun elements, not we the people. The IRS, which is a collection agency for the Federal Reserve Bank, collects income tax that would be deemed illegal under the original Constitution, except it doesn't apply. They collect taxes off you, despite it being deemed as voluntary. And the reason it is voluntary is it is not a tax. It is a tribute to the Crown of England. The IRS also is not an American company. It is situated in Puerto Rico and registered as a trust under the Crown. And here is how the current fiscal policy works in America and all the other countries connected to the Federal Reserve, whose currency is fake to begin with. The Federal Reserve in 2012 had its license and trading in US dollars rescinded, and yet they continue onwards as though nothing happened. America itself only has 60% of all monies spent per year. The other 40% is borrowed only from the Federal Reserve. Now, America would have 100% of the money if all taxes were collected and went to the government. But the Federal Reserve ensures each country must borrow from them at 10% per dollar. Yes, you heard that right. 10% per dollar. None of the 148 or more countries are allowed to print their own money, and they too must pay for dollars for trading at 10%. It is the biggest scam in history, and yet you have so-called American patriots supporting this scam. Now, that comment was in relation to the Q group, or QAnon, celebrating the takeover of the Rothschilds fed by the Black Sun group, of which Trump belongs to via the BlackRock consortium. The US military is not the American army. It is run by China and the Rothschilds family, and did the most treasonous act ever in history. They sold all American military hardware, all of it, to a Chinese group that is not the government, and they have been leasing it back from them for the past few years. All those $35 to $40 million F-16 planes, or the $100 million F-35A planes, or the $13 billion warships, all paid for by the American people, and they sold them to a supposed enemy in China. And yet we still cough up $989 billion a year for these people, who, because of certain clauses, are actually not allowed to currently defend this country or its people. So if a foreign country invaded America tomorrow, we are left with the National Guard, militia, and the people to defend ourselves. Because currently it is illegal for the US military to engage on our own soil. Wrap your heads around that fact. And yet we the people are paying these military who don't act on our behalf, they don't defend on our behalf, $989 billion a year. And it's just as well, they've been saying it since the 1950s, that the Russians didn't come, isn't it? And by the way, that was another lie to harvest vast quantities of American taxpayers' monies to fund the non-American military junta. The Rothschilds and the Vatican claim to own the American military. Fine, I said. I told the trustee to personally send them the bill for all the military spending paid for by the people, and we will build a new one to defend this country and not attack other countries. The US Treasury, all 7 of them, none of it is the real one, is also ran at the behest of the Rothschilds group, and several times Mr. Trump and the trustee tried to get funding to the American people for projects, funding for disasters, which the other non-American foreign-led group called FEMA have failed to do. The trust promised $105 billion of non-loan money directly to the government. And the Treasury and the group formerly known as Citadel, now known as the Weiss Group, blocked it at the behest of Hillary Clinton. Do you want to know why the NYPD is riddled with corruption and cops misbehaving? They are owned by Citadel Weiss also. Hence the video of Clinton and Huma Abedin that the NYPD have will never see the light of day unless true Americans take back their country. And you will never do that via their corrupt voting machines or corrupt elections. The UN is a collection agency to harvest funds out of each country to pay for their clandestine and black budget operations against the people in league with the IMF and the World Bank. NATO also runs along the same subset of principles as the UN, collection monies of countries and stated to be their security group when it is ran by rogue elements of the CIA as private security and intelligence. It is neither. NATO, or to give it correct term, ATON, because NATO is the Rothschilds' private army. Wasabi, ISIS, ISIL, IS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Hezbollah, IRA and various other boogeyman-style mercenary groups are all created, funded and ran by the former Five Eyes agencies and their Dragon Group counterparts. All of them. All bought and paid for by the public's money, under the branding of War on Terror, which is spelt with OR on the end, but it's a play on words as it's War on Terror, spelt Terra. A never-ending war, they said, with the objective to eliminate many of us. Fighting for our freedoms? Don't make me laugh. The old system were not interested in our freedoms. Like never. Their objective was to use us as batteries and enslavement. And this is why nothing works anymore. Nothing is ever done right by our so-called politicians. In reality, they're not politicians. They are script-following pawns in a game they can't see. They harvested everything from our life force energy, which is labour, then took large chunks of the compensation for our life force energy with what is known as taxes, and left many with the bare minimum to sustain our lives, but never enough to make you thrive. And yes, some jump the ladder and for a while make it. But remember, in the game Snakes and Ladders, there are snakes waiting for you at every turn. Boom and bust cycles, recessions, wars, and down you go with the snake. And then repeat the process. But the boom and bust cycles were created for you, all designed to harvest the cream when it all busted. For those with the means to do so, and so away went our businesses, our jobs, ideas, ideals, patents and dreams, all collected by the harvesters of sorrow, the greed merchants, the elites, the bloodline families and the bankers, because it was all designed that way. Wars that have gone on this planet, particularly in the last few hundred years, equals double pay for the harvesters. Collection of dead vessels, releasing souls, termed soul dyers, and the mention of the word war in anything, war on terror, drugs, gangs, etc., leads to the creation of bonds. Bonds are IOUs and debt instruments, and all have been cashed in previously to the trust, and what they're trying to do now is just double dipping everything, including our birth certificate trusts. We'll be back shortly.